Okay, now it's 9 a.m. So we'll 9 a.m. at least Eastern time. Welcome to everyone who's joining from us from a lot of different locations. I've seen a lot of participants joining from a number of different countries. Thank you for joining us today for our technical help chat about engaging fathers in early childhood development and participatory parenting. We have a great group of experts today who'll be answering your questions. My name is Jackie Dielstra. I am the communications lead for ECDAN. I wanted to remind everyone that we have interpretation available for today's event. We do have a speaker who will be providing his responses in Spanish. So during that time, make sure to select the interpretation option and select English as your language of choice if you are a English speaker, so that you can hear the English translation while he provides his responses. I'll provide a reminder about this in the chat, but please, make sure that you use that interpretation option so that you can hear the English-Spanish translation. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pass it off to Miguel Fontes from Promundo to start our event. Thank you, Miguel.
Thanks so much, Jackie. It's a pleasure to be here. It's such a great panel with Professor Asina Ibrahim and also Nikoli Hodger. And we'll start now. And first of all, this is an initiative that we have been promoting together with them, the LEGO Foundation, and this is a follow-up to the first webinar we had with an attendance that was just incredible. And here's a more technical chat for questions that people sent to us when they registered for this technical chat. And so the technical chat is the second step towards organizing the working group on fatherhood led by ECDAN. And we'll have follow-up meetings on the working group. I think all the participants had the opportunity to also, during the registration, link to the interest of the organization to be part of that working group. So that will be quite important. And at the end, and along this technical chat, we're gonna have Louisa and also Jackie, including in the chat box, the emails for Amanda and also for Louisa, for people who would be interested in registering or receiving invitation to participate in the meetings that we'll have for the working group for fatherhood group. So anyway, also this is a time before I start on moving on to the questions for our great experts that we have today. I just want to also mention that we are very delighted and very happy that this is also a time of the year that we're celebrating the anniversary of Promundo. And this is a very special year because we're celebrating the 25th anniversary of Promundo. So I was one of the founders of Promundo together with other two experts in Brazil, Márcio Schiavo and Marilyn Nations. And during these 25 years, I think we dedicated all of our work towards having the opportunity to really create the basis for working with boys and men in trying to engage them in shifts of social norms and gender norms to prevent violence, including promoting the involvement of fathers through programs and reports. And one of our main methodologies is in early child development is Program P, as you may know. And that methodology has received many awards, and we are very delighted to also share this methodology and other methodologies of all of our partners that collaborated with us towards developing that methodology. And it's just great that we have several evaluations to see the role of men in early child development and along all the initial years of life. And this has been a very special moment, just reminding that Promundo, it's an NGO formed and established in Brazil, but we also work at the global level, Promundo, And now we have a wonderful website that people who are interested in 5 different languages. You can choose the language. So you can have it in English, Chinese, Arabic, French, Spanish, and maybe if you want to suggest other languages, we may also include in our website, that is www.promundointernational.org.br. We'd be really happy to have you all together with us. So let's go ahead. We have just 55 minutes for this technical chat. And I just want to give as much time as possible to our experts to respond to our great questions. And I just want to give a quick bio of each one of the experts that will be joining us today. Luciano Ramos, who works for Promundo, is one of the experts. He's not yet with us, but he'll be joining in the very near time frame, because he's in another event, in an in-person event, but he thought this event was so important that he'll be joining us soon. So, but here with us already, we have Professor Hassina Banu Ibrahim, who is a research professor at the University of South Africa, UNICEF. Professor Hassina is a research professor in the Department of Early Childhood Education at UNICEF. She also holds the UNESCO co-chair in Early Education, Care and Development. She's a rated researcher with the National Research Foundation. Her research coheres around early childhood at the margins with special reference to policy, practice, and workplace development. Professor Ibrahim won the 2017 and 2020 UNICEF Women in Research Leadership Award. Professor Ibrahim is the convener of the Knowledge Generation Working Group in the Early Childhood Cluster in the African Union. She is also part of the working group on ECD Educated Workforce Development in the South Africa Department of Higher Education. She's currently leading projects on ECD workforce sustainability, rights-based child participation, and process quality. Professor Hassina, it's a pleasure and an honor to have you with us. We also have Nikoli Hodger, Global Policy and Advocacy Lead for Early Child Development for Plan International. Nicole is currently Plan International's Global Policy and Advocacy Lead for Early Childhood Development, ECD, and has a passion for ECD, gender inclusion, and child rights. For more than 15 years, she worked for Plan International Australia as a program manager and technical advisor for ECD and education, with a focus on the Asia Pacific and Eastern and Southern Africa. Nicole has supported the development of a range of technical resources materials for ECD programming and influencing both development and humanitarian contexts in areas including parenting, early learning, transition to primary school support, maternal and child health and nutrition, gender including men's engagement, and child protection. Nicole has a graduate certificate of educational research and is finalizing a Master of Education by Research with a focus on male early childhood teachers. And then we have Luciano Ramos, who is a senior consultant for Promundo. Luciano is a senior consultant with experience in education around gender and sexuality, including the masculinities approach. He has been coordinating projects at Promundo related to these issues since 2018. Luciano's advocacy experience includes serving as a counselor for the rights of the child and adolescents in Duque de Caxias, a metropolitan region of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and for the National Movement Family and Community Pro Coexistence of Children and Adolescents. He graduated as a historian and holds a specialization in public policy for children from the Latin American Center at Harvard University. And in 2021, Luciano was named a UNESCO Ambassador for Positive Masculinities in the World. So as you can see, we have a great team of experts here. And I will move ahead and already start addressing the questions. And again, as Luciano may be a little late today, I will start with Nikoli Hodger with one of the questions that we received during the registration. Nicole, really welcome here to this panel. It's really great to have you here. I'm really very open here to learn from you. on these very interesting questions that we selected for this event. And the first question, and please feel free also to introduce yourself more and to give your greetings as you speak, and then we go on to Professor Hassina the same way. And the first question that we have for you, Nicole, is in societies where women remain largely responsible for early parenting, how do you start the conversation about gender roles and address cultural beliefs that prevent fathers from actively caring for their children? Nicole, please, you can join us now.
Great, thank you so much, Miguel. And yeah, hi everyone. I'm calling in from Melbourne, Australia. So it's 11 p.m. here. So yeah, just bear with me, but it's really great to be here with everyone and with such an esteemed panel, and also to see such a great number of participants. So thanks so much for the question. As has been recognised in the question, I want to take a step back and actually note, that we all know that in most societies and cultures, women do the majority of caregiving for children, and men's involvement is very limited. And there's actually, many reasons for this lack of involvement, and that varies between countries and communities. But we do know that one of the key determinants of fathers' limited engagement are gender norms. And so, these are the informal rules that are shared within a community or a society about how people should behave based on their gender. And this means that men are expected to be the protector, the provider, and the head of the family, responsible for decision-making and for ensuring the family income. And so it's these norms that discourage men's role as nurturing caregivers and condone men's use of violence also in some circumstances. And other factors include, as we know, limited knowledge around the benefits of men's engagement and perceptions that it's actually women who are naturally more capable caregivers, and not a lot of confidence amongst men, and not many opportunities for them to actually build caregiving skills. And so it's all these factors that also influence the design and provision of early childhood policies and services and programs, such as health, education, social protection, and many of these programs, as we know, are actually designed for or targeted predominantly at mothers, and this also discourages men's engagement. And often parenting programs are also just assumed to be for mothers only. And so, understanding why men behave the way they do, what are the key factors, and who are the people that influence the way they behave, this is actually a key step before we start having the conversations with men about parenting. And so, we really think that effective men's engagement work isn't just about addressing gaps in men's knowledge and skills, it's actually about addressing all these different factors. And so, having said that and sort of framed that, some really important things to consider when we do start having those conversations about gender roles and men's engagement is really, finding those hooks about how can we reach men, what are their desires and hopes for their children and for themselves as fathers, and what messages are actually going to resonate with them. And the reality is that, many men would like to be more involved. So whether you reach men through men's groups or home visits or mentoring programs, for example, consider, starting with content that responds to their needs and really emphasises practical activities and learning from each other, before then moving on to those more challenging subjects like tackling gender norms and gender inequality. And so, yeah, it's really important to create spaces for men to reflect on the advantages and benefits of more equitable norms and ways of being men. And in many communities, we also need to recognise that female partners, men's female partners, also share the same expectations about how fathers should behave. So, yeah, it's really important to provide safe and secure environments for critical reflection and analysis in which men and women meet separately, they meet together to really examine and question negative gender norms and the imbalance of power between women and men, and identify the benefits of change, and also rehearse what that change looks like. What are healthier attitudes and behaviours, and how can we apply them in our everyday lives? And so, yeah, we really need to see that, recognise that it can be hard for men to change, particularly if they think that, there's people around them whose opinions really matter that disapprove of their behaviours. And that could be parents or friends, neighbours, community leaders, All of these things, we need to consider, and being aware that men might even be punished, ridiculed or ostracized, if they go against traditional kind of roles and norms around how men should behave and what they should do within a family. And so, yeah, we also need to be aware of the role of service providers, and that, these also share the same beliefs and expectations about men's abilities and roles. And so we really want to, if we really want to dismantle these barriers to men's involvement in the nurturing care of their children, we also need to work with service providers and train them and make adaptations to services and sector policies and regulations to make sure that these are more welcoming of fathers, obviously alongside mothers, of course. And yeah, if I have time, I can share an example from plans programming. Do I have another minute or two?
Go ahead, Nicole.
Okay, thanks, Miguel. So yeah, look, just briefly, we have implemented a multi-year maternal and newborn health program with a men's engagement component as part of this in Nigeria, where patriarchal gender norms and roles are really strong, as they are in many parts of the world, as was identified in the question. And so in this program in Nigeria, the program worked with men and women through, separate fathers and mothers groups, as well as mixed groups. It also worked with health services. It had a social and behaviour change communication campaign. And also, really importantly, plan work with religious leaders, so both female and male leaders, on men's engagement and gender equality, including around sharing the burden of unpaid care work. And so, a major outcome of this engagement was the co-creation of an Islamic perspective on gender equality and maternal and child health. And so, yeah, this was a really, great initiative in terms of, developing something that really used the Quran to emphasise where, different passages and highlight different passages where, gender equality between men and women was actually recognised in the way that actually gender equality is compatible with Islamic teachings in that context. And so religious leaders really became strong agents of change. They disseminated messages on gender equality and men's engagement, including through prayers, radio, TV shows, and community engagement. So yeah, we've learned a lot from projects such as this, and yeah, we really believe that working with men alone is not enough, and to create that kind of sustained positive change really requires a gender transformative approach, and really requires something that's very community-based and led, multi-sectoral, multi-level, and also recognising that this kind of work does take a long time. It doesn't happen overnight. So yeah, I can share a link in the chat to a guide that Plan and Promundo US have created around promoting men's engagement in nurturing care that addresses some of these issues. I'll share a link in the chat. Thanks, Miguel.
Excellent, Nicole. Also to all participants, we have a Q&A box. If you have questions to Nicole, please feel free to use that. That's a different link to the chat box. And Nicole, as you see that Q&A, you may also receive some questions, but we can share later with you, so we can respond to some of the participants later. And Nicole, I just have a very quick question on your very interesting remarks. You said that you have separate groups for males, separate group for males and mixed. The quick question is, do you have any evaluation what is more effective, or is that a part of methodology that starts with them separately and then you mix? And a very quick question on the service providers. Are these service providers in the health sector, education sector, or social protection sector, or it's a mix of all of them?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Miguel. I think the question around groups. So yeah, I'm talking from the experience of plans work, and I've worked, in many countries, and often, it depends on the context. But our general approach is to kind of recommend what we call gender synchronized approach, which basically means that, some sessions would be separate men's groups and some sessions would be separate women's groups, recognizing that often in many contexts and cultures, women feel much more comfortable talking to women and men feel much more comfortable speaking to men. But we also recognise that it's very important for couples to come together and share what they've learned, troubleshoot, discuss. And so, yeah, we, and in some contexts, the context is really kind of makes would inform that choice. But generally speaking, we kind of, recommend a gender synchronized approach that has both separate groups, but also definitely joining women and men together. And an example, in Timor-Leste, for example, my colleagues there would tell me it's really normal, it's really acceptable for women and men, to come together in a parenting group. Whereas in other countries, it's much more accepted for women and men, perhaps in Pakistan, for example, to meet separately. So yeah, that's the answer to that question. And then in terms of the different service providers, yes, the projects that plan works with, we know that ECD is very much a multi-sectoral, work. We need to do multi-sectoral work. And so, through our, parenting programs, including father engagement, certainly wanting to bring those different sectors in, and using parenting programs as an entry point to really engage fathers, but also to kind of bring in different sectors to support, maternal and child health, to support social protection. Yeah, so kind of working across those sectors. Thanks, Miguel.
Thank you so much. And let me bring on board Professor Hasina also. And please feel free. I will have the question that we selected for you, but feel free to do your initial greetings and also talk a little bit more about your experience. And the question we have for you, Professor Hasina, it's on what is the role of governments and relevant ministries in activating fathers' participation? Please give us an example of a successful governmental program or policy that has increased fathers' engagement. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you very, very much for having me on this platform. And it's very heartwarming to see the kind of progress that has been done on a gendered front in terms of taking fathers' participation, or rather their engagement forward. And not just fathers, but looking at men's engagement broadly. And some people prefer to talk about male engagement, which includes, the young boys and the adolescents and so forth. Being in the space and being a researcher that looks at what's in the margins, I think that one of the key things that we, in the policy environment and in the government kind of circle was the naturalization of women's participation in early childhood. And this is where the male engagement needs to feature strongly. And one of the tags for to create an enabling environment for childcare is the policies and the laws. So if we look at the policies and the laws, the question you have to ask in national context, for example, is that how is that guiding the services and programs with regard to men's participation, fathers' participation in childcare and in the parenting arena, for example. And then looking at the sector policies and what is on offer for engaging men and engaging fathers. So if you look at the health sector, for example, what kinds of openings are there for men to participate? And of course, if you use a gender transformative approach, you're going to look at the importance. Both the men and women there are agents. So both have the capacity to act. So inviting men to participate has to involve women's consent as well. So in the antenatal care, in the labor, the childbirth, postnatal care and essential services, it is about men, but it's also about women and how they take to the kinds of engagements we are trying to promote with men. So a very kind of integrated, synchronized approach, as we heard earlier on. And then the policy analysis. If we look at the policies, that shows us the government's kind of thinking of how they want to roll out this kind of expanded childcare environment. Is it family-centered? Is it constructed on narrow premises of gender inequality? So, men have this, women must have an equal kind of a participation. Is there more a kind of an intersectionality that is coming through? And is the content, the structures, and everything coming out of this policy inclusive of all the genders in providing care. And another arena, I think, in the role of the government is the fiscal, the financial injection into supporting interventions that have shown that they are working and that they are making a difference. So it's not about men taking part in these programs. We've got to ask, what difference are they making to child outcomes? What difference are they making to women's lives in the broader context and in the specific context in which women find themselves? So we want the evidence to show that, you know, all the work that we're doing is working, and that, you know, governments need to take this seriously. The other thing that is very important, I think, is the human resourcing. So if you look at the human resourcing, and the ministries all have in their sectors have the human resource element, to what extent is recruitment, but not just recruitment, because from my experience, the retention of males in the care professions is an issue, because the stigmatization is so heavy. And like, for example, in early childhood centers, getting males in the project that we had in South Africa that just came to an end, it was so difficult for the male students to get into these preschool centers that had babies and toddlers and so forth, because of the whole idea of, you know, child abuse and, you know, those kind of, and women can't, men can't really do the kinds of jobs that are, you know, work streams that are necessary in those kinds of spaces. So both retention, the recruitment and the retention is important. And I think there should be an intentional project where there's bursaries, for example, allocated to for more males to come in. And then monitoring and evaluation is very important, like I said, to the outcomes. And then it has to be informed by, you know, authentic ways of collecting evidence. So maybe observations of delivery program, participants' feedback, but also some mixed methods kind of responses where we are really vigilant on how men are doing in the spaces. And in that process, we've also got to be vigilant to women's agency and women's autonomy, and how that is affected by men's participation. And the example I think that is, you know, that I'd like to share is the Philippines one. So in 1996, Philippines adopted the Paternity Leave Act. And what happened there is that it was directed, the 7 days paternity leave was directed at married fathers living with female spouses. So look at how the conception is about fathers and how things have changed. That was 1996. And so these benefits were paid to the employers in both the private and the public sectors, and it could be used for about like 4 children. And then in 2019, the way society has changed, and, you know, the living arrangements have changed. So to the paternity and maternity leave and entitlements. So what it included was the idea of partners, regardless of marital status. And just from that example, you can see that there's an enabling environment for men to partake in childcare and what have you. The question is whether they take it up or not, right? It's possible that, and now with COVID as well, there's so many of men in the informal sector, and these conditions of service are attached to the formal sector. They get these benefits in the formal sector. So, you know, it excludes a lot of them. And then, like we heard, the gender norms and, you know, taking leave just to, you know, take care of children, that's not within the protector, the disciplinarian kind of breadwinner kind of a role that is dominant among societies and what have you. So having the policy levers, that doesn't necessarily mean the take-up is there. You need further advocacy so that that is forthcoming. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Professor, just reminding Cole and Professor Hasina, we have some questions on the Q&A box, and if you want to address those as you go along, that would be great. Otherwise, we can send those questions also on to you. And Professor, I just have one quick question also. You mentioned about the family-centered approach. Can you provide more detail on your views of what is that family-centered approach, different from, for example, an individual-based approach? Why do you think the family-based approach is so important?
Firstly, let me begin by saying we need to unpack how we define a family. The family is generally understood as the smallest unit in a society. And we know that there is a fragmentary response to the nuclear family. And so, yeah, in the African context, female-headed families are quite, dominant. So the family structures have to be understood. And once you understand the family structure, then you have to look at what kind of intervention would be most suitable around this kind of configuration. So if it's the dominant female-headed household, so you'll get grandma-led. We deal with quite a few ECD centers. ECD centers that receive children from grandmother-led households, right? So you've got a family-centered around those kinds of configurations. Want interventions that really, work well. Then they would have to look at, well, what kinds of roles are played there? Who does what? And then there's also another kind of configuration around fathers. We get not just biological fathers, but we get fathers playing the social role, and especially in like the more rural kinds of community. And from my experience in research, these are the older men that take care of, and the area that we worked on had a lot of orphans. And these are the social fathers that we're, taking them in, playing with them, affording them opportunities to see male role models in action and so forth. So when we look at family-centered, it's an analysis of how you're defining a family, and to understand first what kinds of roles are played and how does that enable and constrain what needs to be done for those particular children in that particular kind of context. So the centering around that family is a contextual affair that requires investigation instead of a straight shoot for this is what we will do with families. Thank you.
So I think this is a key point, and thank you so much for your response. This is basically what we are also facing in Brazil. In many contexts that we work in, we have just the women-led families and the very nuclear, and how to open up to the male figures that is different from the biological fathers or the stepfathers. And we're finding a lot of room to work with other male figures, such as uncles, neighbors, grandfathers, and older brothers, and so on. And it has been a very interesting experience. So I'm really happy that you cover that, because I think this is a key point, that we're not talking on the fatherhoods only on the issue of the biological father or of the partner, male partner, but much more in a broader context, because all of them can be engaged, and all men has the potential for unpaid caregiving, especially in early child development. So thank you so much. And Nicole, I want to go back to you with another question. You mentioned already the program that is being developed in Africa, but do you have other successful programs in practice for preparing fathers for active participation during antenatal period and getting fathers involved early on with their newborn? So specifically on the prenatal, are you aware of programs that are focusing more on the health sector that really brings the clinic? Because, for example, in Brazil, we always named the prenatal units as a child maternity, infant maternity clinic. We never included the word for fathers, and we're trying to change that with the Ministry of Health. I was just wondering if you had any other programs that you heard about, or that you are engaged, or Plan International is engaged on trying to really bringing men as a main part of the prenatal, the delivery, and the early child development in the health sector.
Yeah, thanks so much, Miguel. And yeah, I certainly agree with you. You know, I touched on it earlier that sometimes the services themselves and the way they're set up and named can be a real barrier for men to come along. So yeah, I mean, you know, in terms of plans work, and you know, more broadly, of course, we know that the earlier fathers are engaged, the longer they're likely to remain engaged, and therefore, you know, their antenatal period particularly presents a really great window of opportunity to work with couples and to promote men's involvement. And so, yeah, I can share an example from Plans Work. So this is from, so our Plan Canada office has been implementing a gender transformative program called Strengthening Health Outcomes for Women and Children. And that included in Nigeria, but also in Bangladesh, in Ghana, in Haiti, and in Senegal. And so this program really worked on multiple levels. And so it was looking at empowerment of adolescent girls and women, but also strengthening of gender responsive maternal and child health and sexual and reproductive health and rights services, and also promoting men's engagement in the health care and wellbeing of their children and partners right from the start. And so really what that program, you know, some examples of the program work was, for example, a Daddy's Club curriculum that was created that had 20 sessions, and it promoted things like positive and non-violent masculinity. It talked about, you know, harmful gender norms and how to, you know, change those, and also that equitable sharing of care work and men's support for and participation in maternal and child health. And so, you know, it was also important, you know, I think we've sort of touched on, yeah, we need to work with men, but we also need to obviously work with women who may hold, you know, kind of similar, you know, views around the role of men and the role of women. But so it's also important to kind of work with women's groups, you know, to improve their own knowledge and skills on maternal and child health care, to create, you know, demand for services for women and men, and also strengthen understanding of the benefits of men's engagement. And so, yeah, I mean, it was about supporting health workers and authorities to understand the importance of men's positive involvement, and, you know, how this involvement can actually help them reach their objectives for maternal and child health, supporting men's participation in different health contexts, including those during the antenatal period, as you touched on, and, you know, for expectant couple sessions. And also, yeah, making those changes to infrastructure that you alluded to, infrastructure, equipment, operations, you know, opening hours, delivery room infrastructure, all of those things to make sure that those services are welcoming and more supportive of men's participation. But I also just want to kind of recognise that, you know, in this kind of context, in the maternal and child health context, that it's also really important to, you know, to be aware of, to be cognizant of risks associated, you know, with men's engagement in maternal and child health. And, you know, for example, you know, for women, greater participation of men in ante and postnatal care and child health may mean, you know, men may assume greater control over women's bodies. And this can be particularly dangerous for women who are in violent or abusive relationships. And we also need to remember that if women attend with their partners, you know, we've heard about some, you know, systems where women who attend with their partners might actually receive preferential treatment or get quicker attention. And this obviously has negative impacts on women who attend alone. And so it's really important to kind of identify and prevent these kind of risks. This is key to also keep in mind. And so this kind of program that I've talked about, this 5-country program, you know, there is an evaluation, a final evaluation that will be ready shortly. But, you know, what we've learned along the way and the results that we've seen is that, you know, with this kind of engaging, you know, men early in the antenatal period, but also, you know, delivery and postnatal period, is that, you know, there has been increases in demand by women for services, all of those services, as well as increases in sort of satisfaction levels with the services, definitely increased participation of men including, in the home, in household and childcare work, once the baby arrives. And then, just evidence of more shared and autonomous decision-making. So more shared decision-making between women and men, and just increased support of men to women's nutrition and to use of maternal and child health services, as well as, really importantly, reported reductions in kind of conflict and gender-based violence in the families. So, yeah, so absolutely, getting men involved, from before birth and on is really important, and can have, really, important benefits for, for men themselves, but particularly, for women and children. Thanks.
Thanks, Nicole. One program that I like very much also, it's in Brazil, it's a policy now. It's not only a program, sorry, it's even a policy of the Ministry of Health. And doesn't matter what government is in, if it's more autocratic or more progressive or whatever. And they call the prenatal partners program. It's very interesting, and it has been training many health providers all over Brazil remotely. As a matter of fact, the course, we organized that course together with the Ministry of Health, and we already have over 20,000 health professionals trained. And we see now popping up some interesting feedback, for example, of health providers or pediatricians who used to have just one chair for the woman in their offices, and now they have two. they just have two right there. And these small changes that are so, it becomes much more male friendly. And also they found this as a great opportunity also to identify the health needs of men. Because trying to bring them attention for prevention, it was also a great opportunity for prenatal, not only for the child and for the partner. This is very clear, and a lot of scientific studies show now that this participation is key during prenatal delivery and the first years of life. But for the men themselves, it's like a great investment for the men to get engaged, because we can see all these benefits. I remember when I had my first kid in Brazil, I had to pay to see the delivery of my first child. And now this is a policy in Brazil. It's prohibited to charge the males to watch the delivery of the kids in the health unit. So very interesting approaches, and I think we're getting much more momentum towards getting men to understand also the benefits for themselves. And we'll move on to another question for Professor Ibrahim. And the question is, mothers traditionally are more involved in children's education starting from early age. How can providers of early learning encourage fathers to be involved in early education? This is great. So we had a question more towards the health sector and prenatal care. And now we are having a question more on the early child development, focusing on the education. So, Professor.
Thank you very much. If I got your question correctly, it's about encouraging fathers in early education. So yeah, we want to break the stereotype of having mothers involved in the space here, and denaturalization of nurturance. That's where fathers come in. I think that the way that we need to do it is to have a look at our the information that we request, for example, from, if you look at child profile, for example, and look at to what extent is the information inclusive of fathers, and how much of that is included in the child profiles. It might not seem like such a big thing, to a lot of people, but in the context that I work, you see this, that, normally the details of the mother is there because that's the face that you see with the child. And then there has to be an intentional kind of activities in the community that sends out the message that men are good for children, good for children. And I know that Nicole mention in the Nigerian part of it was co-construction, for example, of how religion played an important part in getting to know, fathers' participation from a particular angle. So the community faith-based organizations are quite strong, and they have sermons and they have gatherings and so forth. And this messaging can be quite strong in terms of how fathers can support children in their early learning experiences and so forth. And then they, in my experience, there has been like particular events that target fathers. And you probably know some of them called Dads and Lads, or breakfast with fathers and things like that. So these are very intentional. They tend to be more in the urban setup, and they tend to be more in provisions for middle class, right? It is always difficult, mothers or fathers, to get them to come into PTA setups and so forth. So arrival and departure time. In a workshop discussion we did with Anglophone and Francophone Africa on fathers, and participants were talking about how there is visibility now of fathers dropping off their children at the preschool centers. And that's the moment during arrival time, for example, that they have many conversations about children's learning and how fathers can get involved with them. So I think that, to look at it contextually and what kinds of opportunities allow for fathers to get involved is an important thing. Sometimes it's just a matter of you don't know what you don't know, because that has not been part of the repertoire of your experience of your father. So explicit telling of what kinds of things could help fathers to get closer to their children, for example. So a simple thing like, reading of stories, or teaching a child a skill, or maybe having weekly kind of family gathering where fathers, especially those that are working, actually set aside the fun time with families, like you have with couples, the date night. This is more date nights with the children. So transforming the home space by giving options, and this normally comes from the early child centers, and where the traditional duties have been like the mothers, like for example, following the immunization in the a schedule in the road to health card, where mothers traditionally do this, to encourage fathers to accompany them. And I know that our participants spoke about the visibility of fathers in, for example, the queues, the clinic queues and what have you, brought some incentives in terms of, they would be attended to first and things like that, but that was also subjected to some kinds of abuse. So the tall and short of this is that work from the assumption that fathers are willing, that they do want to get involved, but there are barriers and obstacles. And then a good investigation of what these barriers and obstacles are then gives us the kinds of interventions that that would be required. And not all of them, for example, would take place at just your early childhood centers. Some would be in an whole visiting setup. Others would be in the community platforms, and yet others would be at specific times where there is an emphasis on fathers. The big one is on Father's Day, and things happen in terms of celebrations and things like that. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor. This is great, and we are already going to the last 10 minutes of our technical chat, and as we always say, time flies when we're having fun and having these great comments, and also the questions we're having here on the link of Q&A. They are really good questions, and thank you so much for that, for all the participants. And for this last 10 minutes, I would just change a little bit the script because we had an overall question for Nikoli and Professor Ibrahim, and just reminding that unfortunately Luciano won't be able to join us, but I'll step into the second question that was also mentioned, the PA. The first one, I will leave it to just Nikoli and Professor Ibrahim to answer, which relates to monitoring and evaluation. What is, again, what would be the indicators of this monitoring and evaluation on your experience that are key to understanding the increasing engagement of men in fatherhood and early childhood development? And then after that, we'll have a second question that it's regarding traditional leaders, and the question was, gender roles are deeply rooted in cultural and religion. Approach should involve the custodians of the two. Any case studies of involvement traditional leaders? I want to give a step into that question after, but also we'll leave them to Nikoli and to Professor Ibrahim to answer those questions, that question, and to make their final remarks. So just getting back to the first question that we received, it's regarding the monitoring evaluation. Nikoli and Professor Ibrahim, if you want to step in.
Oh, thanks, Miguel. I think that's a really good question. And yeah, I mean, I've shared a link in the chat, and I'll share it again to Plan International and Promundo US's guidance on engaging men in early childhood development, and that includes, a results framework for men's engagement in nurturing care in ECD and maternal health and well-being. And we're also, at Plan developing a lot of indicators, a very detailed kind of indicators around that. But certainly, we want to look at different kind of outcome level changes amongst fathers, for example. So, we'd want to look at and monitor fathers, their increased confidence, knowledge and skills to support, to support early childhood development and their partner's health and well-being. We'd also want to look at the change in fathers' gender equitable attitudes and expectations about care, care work, child rearing and household decision making, for example. And also, another key kind of, outcome level change that we'd be looking for. And these are all obviously very long-term changes that you'd be monitoring, not in a 6-month period or a 1-year period, but in a kind of a longer period of time. You'd also be kind of looking for changes in shared decision making, in the kind of intra-couple and intra-household relationship around care work and child rearing. And so those are those kind of longer term kind of changes that we'd be looking for. And certainly, there are a lot of sort of output level changes that you could also look for in terms of, attendance at parenting, sessions, or attendance at maternal and child health appointments, so there are lots of different kind of things that you can measure to kind of look at, the change that you're seeking in these kind of programs. But certainly, I'll put the link in the chat again. There is a results framework in the plan guidance. And as I said, we also, as are many, organisations developing, very detailed indicators to also help us to kind of track this change and help us to demonstrate, the change that we're trying to see. But I'll hand over to the professor as well to add. Thanks.
Well, I couldn't say it better than you, Nikoli. I think you covered it quite comprehensively. The only thing I wanted to say is around indicator development when you're looking at fathers. So I think it's really important, especially where at one time we had this alarm about absent fathers. And really, upon investigation, found that they actually were distant fathers, that they were making a financial contribution to their children's lives. And so if you just looked at a narrow sense of how our fathers are providing for their children by way of physical presence, then you might not get an accurate picture of it. So in the indicator development, I think it is very important to again be mindful of the socio-cultural context that makes certain kinds of things possible for tracking and monitoring and seeing evidence of change. I agree that these things here don't happen overnight. You're dealing with mindsets, with attitudes. People will do some things for a little while and then hit the ceiling there and go back. So it's difficult, it's complex, it needs to be unraveled. So looking at your baseline, looking at your process kind of evaluations, looking at your end lines and so forth, should then give you a kind of a picture of what the narrative is around fatherhood. So yes, and all the things you mentioned about the results framework and what have you, fully supported.
Yeah, on the question of monitoring evaluation, also what we're trying to do in Brazil, in Promundo, it's how we can measure also the gender equality in unpaid caregiving. And one thing that we tried was to do a research tool that it's a 9-point scale, 9 representing women do everything, and 1 men do everything, and 5 it's like the middle ground. It's the gender equality in playing, in taking care of the kid, of hygiene, of food, and so on. And it has been very interesting because the scale in that sense, always we have a scale that the best are even on the 1 or 9. Here it's 5. And also we ask males how they think it should be, not only what is right now, but how it should be. So these are some interesting tools that we also be talking, and some of the things that Nikoli, Professor Brain mentioned on the working group. Maybe we'll have specific working groups or topics on the working group on monitoring and evaluation. The next meeting we'll have on the working group, the initial meeting, will be to try to address these topics and really try to exchange more of these experiences that come from different parts of the world. And just to finalize on the traditional families, we have been working very strongly in the Amazon of Brazil with indigenous peoples and riverside populations, people who live near the Amazon River. And it has been very interesting to us because Program P was always conceived as a cycle, as Nikoli said, of already engaging families and very family oriented, as Professor Bray mentioned, and trying to mobilize and sensitize also public servants on the importance of main engagement. So we had like a step 1, how we can have public policy reinforced on understanding the role of men. Second, let's go to the community, understanding males and females, and also families, the importance of men. Third, having the groups, the participatory groups. We focus more on men than women. But we had some also for Program M, the groups of women, and then the question of evaluation. With traditional families, we changed that all around, because traditional families, you need to have step number 1 being listening. How we listen to these communities, how we understand the symbolic nature of the culture, of the rich culture they have on understanding these gender roles for themselves, and not having this Western look on how we define gender equality in our own terms. And this has been a fantastic experience because it has an anthropological component as well, but we don't go with any preconceived concepts in our minds, and really trying to understand. And for example, for the indigenous populations, the YMPs we are working in Brazil, we learned that they are very gender equal in caregiving for their child. For example, a family that has a new child, the man already received paternity leave for 6 months. He needs to stay at home, taking care of the kid with his partner. And when we ask them, why do you need these 6 months? Oh, it's to have a full physical and spiritual connection with our kid. So 6 months is their ideal, and the community will take care of all the needs for harvesting or hunting or anything like that, or bringing water, but they need to have 6 months together very closely on the caregiving frame because they need to have that spiritual and physical core. This is beautiful. So the reality of the work that we do there, is the opposite. It's how these great cultural value can be passed on to new generations that are already being exposed to our Western views of how things should be. And because the indigenous populations, the new generations, they tend to be in universities, they tend to leave their tribes. But now we are working with a topic on a methodological topic that they use their own language, the Guarani language, to reinforce how this is wonderful, how they already have that cultural value that should be so much perpetuated in that community. So it's a kind of a conservation, preservation of what is already so rich in that community. So we are learning so much with these communities. And I will leave it with that, and I will now just pass on very quickly then to Nicole and Professor Ibrahim to also comment on that question. Please feel free to do so, and also your final remarks. So Nicole, first with you.
Thank you, Miguel. Yeah, look, I think I'll just, I know because we're running out of time. So I guess, look, I just want to, make a couple of, I guess, points just to close and just to say, that the evidence really tells us that men's engagement is beneficial for their children, their female partners and themselves as men. And really importantly, when men's engagement, when participatory fathering, is done well, and also recognising, of course, there are many different kinds of fathers and male caregivers, that it provides a really crucial entry point for challenging gender inequality and gender norms and roles that are limiting and discriminatory, particularly for girls and women, but also for men and boys. And so, for example, participatory fatherhood means children themselves, and this was a question that was asked in the chat, about the kind of gender socialization processes that we all know children, very young children, even before birth, are experiencing. That, that if children have engaged fathers, they're actually, have an increased likelihood to actually challenge traditional gender norms and stereotypes themselves. And so I think that we can see, that the benefits of male engagement, of sort of engaged fathers and male caregivers can actually be intergenerational. So yeah, that's my final comment. Thanks, Miguel.
Thanks, Nicole, so much. Professor Ibrahim.
Thank you for the space to give the last comments. I think that, yes, there's a lot of work to be done in this space. And we know, like Nicola said and Miguel has said, that there are positive spin-offs for children, women, and in fact, society to benefit from men's participation. The one thing I didn't hear very much of, and which came, in our in one of the online workshops that we did, was around this new brand of women in the 21st century that elect not to have men in their lives, but they want children. And so they go onto the sperm banks and things like that, and supported by medical aids and what have you, and they live a life where they bring up the children by hand. And this was brought up, by participants in an African context, which is really changing the kinds of thinking about, having children, who plays the role of the significant other, and so forth. So whilst we are thinking about generationing, and we're thinking about enactments of practice, we're thinking of geographical context and social cultural practices, we also have to think about these kinds of changes that are taking place that begs us to think differently. And I think that the focus on fathers is not just about fathers, like was said today. It's a whole range that opens up the debate in early childhood for making a difference in children's life and for it to be public good. Thank you very much.
To say that was an honor, Nicole and Professor Ibrahim, to be joining this 1 hour with you. Was very light and very informative, and I'm just so excited that this will have follow-ups. So we're going to have this working group Will be very democratic, very engaging, very participatory. I want to thank so much ECDAN for just being the facilitator for all of this wonderful work by great team at ECDAN. I also want to thank the team that put this together from Promundo, Luisa Panuri, who is here with us, and Bruna Martins, very great. And I'll pass on to Jackie to just finalize with some of the. You should hear from us very soon about our first meeting of the working group. We'll try to make that announcement in pretty much advance so everybody can schedule and be with us. But I think, Jackie, I also want to mention, if you are interested in involving your organization in the working group, there is a specific email that if you didn't say anything during the registration, you still have time to be part of our mailing list for the working group on fatherhood. Jackie, once again, thank you so much for ECDAN and great space here for the technical chat of today. It was really an honor to be the moderator for this session. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining and for your great questions during the registration and also during this event. We're sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but we're excited to continue this conversation, as Miguel mentioned, in the working group on fatherhood as part of the global initiative Support Parents. I know many of you expressed your interest in your registration to learn more about that working group. Those will be more interactive and hopefully smaller conversations rather than this webinar format. So if you are interested in joining that working group, we will reach out to you if you express that in your registration. And I know Louisa put the email address that you can email to also to express your interest or kind of continue the conversation. Louisa, maybe you can drop that into the chat again. But we look forward to continuing this conversation, and thank you so much for joining us today. Have a great day or great evening, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Okay.